Welcome to another episode of Paragon's Favorite Stuff, where I show you all the things that we love to have aboard our 42-foot sailboat named Paragon. Today, I'm going to show you the one thing that has made the biggest difference in our offshore voyaging in the past 25 years. And that's the ability to get customized marine weather reports via a satellite connection while we're underway, no matter where we are on Earth. When I first started offshore voyaging, the only way you could get a weather report when you were offshore was by using a single sideband radio or a satellite phone to talk with a weather router, or to download weather faxes. Way back then, I spent years sailing back and forth between New England and the Caribbean, and I always used my single sideband to talk to a weather router named Herb Hilgenberg. On those passages, I would call Herb on frequency 12.359 at a specific time every day. If we could hear each other over the static, then I would give him our position and describe our current conditions. He would evaluate our progress and look at the weather forecast and basically tell me where he thought we should be heading to. Here's a little clip showing what that was like. So Herb says, "My God, you're going too slow. I'm worried about you." He said like 3 or 4 times, "I'm worried about you because you seem to be going really slow." And then he says, "Your waypoint to enter the Gulf Stream is, same place, this one point, going to the Gulf Stream here, but at our slow speed, we estimate that we'll arrive there at midnight tonight." And he's saying, under no circumstances should you enter the stream until noon tomorrow. So you're going too slow, but you're going to get there way too early.
It doesn't make much sense, yeah.
And then he said, well, later on you're going to get some really bad weather. It makes sense to get through the stream as soon and as fast as you can. And he says, some people might think that they can do it. But it depends on the person and the boat and how comfortable they are with the boat. I mean, was that like code or something for,
For if you feel like you can do it,
but
do
I'm
it.
not going to tell you. I don't know.
What's today, Thursday morning?
Looking south because Herb said we're screwed.
But we're getting there pretty fast, actually.
Herb said, quote unquote, step on it and get south as fast as we can to avoid storm force winds. He just said that we have to go due south as fast as possible. At other times, like when we sailed from Boston to Newfoundland to Greenland, we used our single sideband to download weather faxes while we were underway. Those weather faxes were only transmitted at certain times of day and on particular frequencies. If I could receive the transmission, then I would use my computer to record the audio coming in over the single sideband, and then this software would convert that audio recording to the weather fax image. Alright, I'm downloading the latest weather fax. The weather fax is taking forever to come true. This crazy wind that we're getting is from that front.
That's moving northwest. So I think this is actually good for us because we're sitting around the area or the warm front somewhere. Just I think we're around here-ish.
Yeah.
That's the center of the low here. So you're getting the lines are really close together, so that's where the stronger wind is going to be. So we're out a little bit, so that's okay.
How fast is that low moving? that WeatherFax image showed what was going on with the highs and the lows on one map of the entire Atlantic. I always had lots of problems with both of those methods. A lot of the time, atmospherics were interfering with the reception and I couldn't hear the weather router, or he couldn't hear me over the static. And likewise, sometimes I wasn't able to adequately receive the WeatherFax signal over the static enough to actually get the information I needed from it. If I was able to download the WeatherFax, then it was always a really tedious and time-consuming process to do it. And a lot of the time, the resulting WeatherFax just didn't give me enough information to make much of a change with my route planning. When you're several days into an offshore passage and you're not really sure what's coming up for weather, that can be a kind of nerve-wracking experience. If you get hit by heavy weather and you just weren't expecting it, that can be terrifying. The winds increased to above 40 and gusting as high as 56. It was unbelievably windy and I was terrified. So much has changed since then. If you were to ask me today, what's the biggest technological innovation that's happened in the past 25 years that's increased safety at sea for offshore sailors, I would definitely say that it's the ability to get an accurate weather forecast at any time far offshore by using a satellite connection to the internet. There are several products out there that do this. I'm just going to show you what we've been using for the past 7 years. First, there's an app called Predictwind. It runs on iOS and Android devices and on Mac and PC. It's free to install with limited functionality, but for full functionality, it requires a paid subscription. I started using Predictwind about 7 years ago, and over those years it has made all the difference in the world. So much so that today I wouldn't want to go on a long distance offshore passage without it. It's a really sophisticated app and it has a ton of different features, but I'm just going to go over the very basics of how we use it. Right now we're in Norway and we're looking for a weather window to sail across the North Sea over to the Orkney Islands. It's late September, it's getting colder and windier now. The weather windows are definitely fewer and much further in between. It's absolutely critical, especially this late in the season, that we leave at the right time. If we get it right, then we'll be able to comfortably sail the whole way without ever having to run the engine. If we get it wrong, then we might get trapped in really dangerous heavy weather, or we might have to run the engine the whole way, which would cost a fortune in fuel. Let me show you the Predictwind app running on my MacBook Pro. First, I'll zoom in on the dock here so you can get a good look at the app icon. It's a world globe with a start and end point for a voyage route. We'll just run the app. And then before we get into the weather, first I want to show you this section of the app called GPS tracking. Here it displays a GPS record of everywhere that we've sailed so far this season. We started out in the Western Isles of Scotland and then sailed up to the Faroe Islands, down to Shetland, and then a longer leg across the North Sea down to Denmark, where we spent the last 2 months exploring this wonderful fjord called Limfjord. Then we sailed up to Norway, which is where we're at right now, and if I zoom way in, you can see that we are at anchor right here off of this little island. Now we want to sail across the North Sea again over to the Orkney Islands right here. It's about a 285 nautical mile voyage, and we're now just looking for what the best day is for pushing off. When figuring out weather windows, we always use this part of the app called departure planning. Here we have this start point and end point. We'll just move the start point to where we are in Norway, right off of the city of Stavanger. And then we'll move the end waypoint over to the Orkney Islands, close to the city of Kirkwall, which is where we want to arrive. You can add more waypoints along this voyage route by clicking on this button and clicking on these plus signs, and then you can move the waypoints around like this. But for our voyage, we only really need the start and end waypoint, so I'm just going to delete all of the ones in between. Then we'll click on this download button right here. Here I can choose various options for downloading GRIB weather forecasts and specify the earliest possible time that we want to push off. I can say we're going to push off right now if we're going to leave immediately, or I can choose a date and time. I'll just set this to tomorrow at 1 p.m. So that'll be the earliest time that we will push off. Then I'll click to the next screen. It shows me what files it's going to download from the internet. There are files for the different weather models, and very importantly, this departure planning file. I'll just click on the download links. We're using an iPhone with a cellular data plan as a Wi-Fi hotspot for the computer, so the download speeds here are really fast. And then this table gets generated that shows very essential information. The first column in the table shows us stats for if we pushed off at that first time that we specified, tomorrow at 1 p.m. The next column shows us stats for if we pushed off exactly 24 hours later, and so on for the next two columns. I've set the interval in between departure times to 24 hours, but you can also choose to set it to 1, 2, 3, 6, or 12 hours. Going through each of the rows, for each of those departure times, we can see the estimated duration of time that the entire voyage will take, the maximum and minimum wind speeds that would be encountered, the maximum gust speed, the percentage of time spent sailing upwind, on a reach or downwind, the percentage of time spent in these wind ranges, and very useful, the percentage of time you would spend going upwind in winds over 15 knots, which for our boat would be difficult. It shows percentage of time with wind against current, which would make for bad seas, and also the percentages of time that you would spend in these wave conditions. When I first saw this table, it really blew my mind. This is so much more information than what was available to us before in a weatherfax. Ideal conditions for our boat are to have a sail that's on a beam reach or broad reach with no upwind sailing and in wind speeds of between 15 and 20 knots. As you can see from the table, we don't have those ideal conditions if we push off on any of the next 4 days. The maximum wind speeds that could be encountered regardless of what day we push off are in the higher range of what I like. Also, the maximum gust speeds can get pretty high, up to potentially 41 knots. You can also see that regardless of what day we push off, we will have some upwind sailing, up to 25% upwind sailing if we leave on the 4th departure date. You can definitely see that most of the sailing is going to be on a reach, and just a little bit of the sail would be downwind if we leave on the 2nd, 3rd, or 4th day. The percentage of time we would spend in these wind speeds looks like the 3rd and 4th days would definitely be a bit windier, with up to 6% of the voyage spent in wind speeds of between 30 and 40 knots. I think I'd like to avoid that. We would spend a little bit of time departing on the 3rd and 4th days in upwind sailing conditions with winds over 15 knots. I'd prefer to avoid that. The waves are definitely going to be a bit more if we push off on the 3rd departure date or 4th departure date. So you look at this table, and sometimes it just makes it blatantly obvious that you cannot push off on certain dates, because you'll see things like it's 100% upwind sailing in winds of between 30 and 40 knots, and then you just know, yeah, there's no way I'm going to leave on that day. Sometimes you see things in this table that make it absolutely clear, yes, that's the date you want to push off. And other times, it's somewhere in between. The Predictwind app also has this animated map feature, and this really blew my mind when I first saw it also. You can drag this marker here over this timeline and see the grid weather file play out over time, along with moving boat icons that show where the software thinks your boat will be if you push off on each of the departure times in your table. If I bring this back to the beginning and then just click on the play button, then time will automatically start moving forward. You can see that as we approach 1 p.m. tomorrow, the first boat pushes off in winds coming out of the south of 20 knots on a reach, and then the winds shift to being out of the north and getting very, very light. So pushing off on that first boat doesn't look that appealing to me, because I can see that it's got not a lot of wind, so it would be very much a motor trip. We can see the second boat push off exactly 24 hours later. Winds out of the north, 20 knots, 15 knots on a reach, 15 knots out of the north. Then it gets lighter. Now it's about 5 knots. So maybe it would have to start motoring for a little bit there, but then the winds pick up again. 15 knots, always out of the north, always on a reach. Coming into Orkney in very, very light conditions, which is also appealing. Let's see the third boat push off. That boat takes off in winds from the north on a reach, 15 knots, but the software thinks that you should go more to the south to take advantage of conditions. Looks like a real light patch there before it picks up again, or not. Winds out of the north. No, that looks pretty light. And then we have all of this really strong wind approaching, coming out of the south. It gets up to 20, 25, and then it's on the nose. So definitely that third boat, I don't think I'd want to be that, because out of the gate, not really enough wind. Actually, yeah, that boat's going south because there's more wind further south, chasing the wind, but it's only got so much to work with before it gets really calm, and then things turn nasty with winds towards Orkney. Yeah, I don't like the third boat. And I definitely don't like the fourth boat either. It's just motoring around and then gets hit with stronger winds that are upwind, and then it switches to the north, and it's, too strong. 25 knots. That means gusting much higher. Don't like pushing off on the fourth boat at all. Don't really like the third boat. Maybe the second boat? Let's look at that again. Second boat, out of the gate, winds out of the north, on a reach, 15 knots, then maybe it gets a little lighter, or not. Maybe it stays a little bit lighter, but I think just for a shorter duration of time before it picks up again. 15 knots again, out of the north, on a beam reach, coming in, nice and calm conditions. We may choose to push off on the second day. We may have a window. That second boat may be our window. Sometimes we're waiting for a weather window for several days or even several weeks, but I'll always prefer to wait for as long as it takes to get a good weather window rather than go out where there's a chance it will hit heavy weather. The other big part of the picture here is satellite connectivity to the internet while we're offshore. Right here above the dinette table, I have this product called the Iridium GO. It's a satellite internet terminal. It's connected to a satellite dome that we have installed on the stern arch. We can use Iridium GO with the Predictwind app to download weather while we're offshore. And that's been a total game changer for us. When you first push off on an offshore passage, the weather forecast that you got just before you left is only good for about 3 days. Beyond that, it gets much less reliable. But with the Iridium GO and the Predictwind app, I can download a fresh weather report at any point in the voyage. Also, if you get the unlimited data plan, then you can just download weather non-stop for the entire voyage. When we sailed from the Faroe Islands directly to Svalbard, that offshore passage took 12 days. And throughout that whole thing, I was constantly downloading fresh weather reports. We hit a lot of heavy weather on that passage, but the big deal was we always knew that it was coming. It was always a case where we knew we wouldn't be able to get away from the approaching heavy winds, but we knew exactly down to the hour when those winds would hit. So we could prepare the boat and prepare ourselves and just be completely ready for when the heavy weather hit us. If you'd like to see what that voyage was like, then you can click on the link to the video we have. It's in the video description. In addition to being able to get fresh weather reports when we're offshore, we can also use the Iridium GO and an iPad to send and receive text messages and make voice calls to landlines and cell phones. On offshore passages, I love to use text messaging to stay in touch with friends ashore who are tracking our progress. That way I can tell them in real time how we're doing and also get recommendations from them on how to handle any of the things that we may be dealing with. Being able to make phone calls at sea, no matter where you are on Earth, can also make all the difference in the world when it comes to handling emergencies. At the beginning of this season, when we pushed off from Scotland, we were in convoy with another sailboat that caught on fire. The crew of that sailboat abandoned ship into a life raft, and we caught up with them and then rescued them. During that time, I tried to use my VHF radio to call the Coast Guard or any other vessel, but at that point we were far enough offshore that we were just out of range of any station, so nobody could hear us on the VHF. Then I got our Iridium GO and I called the Coast Guard and told them everything that had happened. Shortly after, a Coast Guard vessel arrived and took the crew from the other boat aboard and took them to land. We were really thankful that we had the Iridium GO aboard and were able to use it to communicate with the Coast Guard during this emergency situation. If you'd like more information about the Iridium GO and the Predictwind app, then check out the links we've included in the video description. And if you have any questions for us about how we use Predictwind and the Iridium GO, then please just ask us in the comments. If you'd like to see what our weather forecast looks like in Predictwind when we do find our window to sail to Orkney, then just stay tuned. I hope you've enjoyed this video. If you did, then please give us a thumbs up and subscribe. Wishing you fair winds and happy and safe sailing. We'll see you in the next video.